Monica and all the work there. Most recently, whether it's been with all of the work that Dr. Orduna has done to support I'm going to butcher this, Dr. Orduna, but the advent and implementation of the new county department on homelessness. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Orduna as one of our panelists. Thank you for being here with us this evening.
Thanks, Rhea. Thank you,
Thank you.
Supervisor.
Thank you. Next, I'm going to introduce our panelist, Miss Reba Stevens. If you were on our meeting early on while we were testing our audio, you received the privilege and pleasure of hearing Reba's voice. Excellent singer. But that voice also, Reba is a renowned community advocate with lived experience in Los Angeles, lived experience in being unhoused, and I don't know that you can say champion for change without mentioning Miss Reba Stevens. Reba is an advocate on so many levels, whether it is for our unhoused fellow Angelinos, whether it is contributing to various commissions, boards such as LASA's COC board, from all the way to a mental health commissioner for the County of Los Angeles, to a host of compassionate, service-driven work that Reba does as an advocate in our communities to address homelessness, systemic racism, mental health, and substance use recovery. I hope I haven't missed anything there, Reba. And then panelist that I'd like to introduce is Dr. Seth Pickens. Dr. Seth joins us from USC's HPRI, also known as our Homelessness Policy Research Institute. He is the managing director there, and Dr. Pickens is newer to Los Angeles, but man, Dr. Pickens is generating impact in our community and has been at the head of some groundbreaking research as it pertains to homelessness in Los Angeles, is at the forefront of addressing the nexus of academia's role in homeless services and systemic racism. Dr. Pickens also, before joining at HPRI, has a background in economic justice, so was very influential with the Economic Roundtable at, I believe it's the Realization Project, and as well as a background as, I might butcher this, but a pastoral background, a background in faith and ministry. So thank you for joining us, Dr. Pickens. Thank you, Reba. Thank you, Dr. Ordunia. And now it is my distinct privilege and pleasure to introduce my favorite supervisor and the founder of our Empowerment Congress, Supervisor Dr. Mark Ridley-Thomas. Supervisor, I won't be able to do any ounce of justice to your introduction, so I'm just going to pass it to you and say thank you. And thank you for moderating this evening.
Well, I want to say thank you to you, Reba, for your leadership, your consistency, your constancy in the work on behalf of the Empowerment Congress, and chairing and co-chairing the working group. It sustained itself in a magnificent way. Many of you who have been party to these conversations over the last 2.5 years know that, and certainly both Alisa Orduna and her leadership role here, as well as Reba Stevens and her significant role as well, have a lot to be proud of in terms of how the Empowerment Congress has essentially stayed the course. Seth Pickens and I know each other largely from the faith-based context. He's been a pastor. He's done scholarly work in the area of theology and pastoral care. Graduate of Union Theological Seminary. And that's one of the premier institution that has a storied history. And so we welcome all three of our respective panelists. I'm proud to be a part of this because I maintain and I will not retreat from this position. The matter of homelessness is the defining moral issue of our times. If you think about it from the vantage point of morality, um, and not proselytizing, not evangelizing, just the bare bones of what it means to be a human being and the dignity and worth with which you are imbued. And to the extent that that is diminished, it raises a plethora of moral questions. I maintain that. The public policy discussion around homelessness in our city, in our county, in my view, going back to when I was at SCLC in the 80s and then more formally as a policymaker in the 90s, more going forward, it was that public policy discussion was bereft of moral content. And I often sought to say that this conversation has to be revisited in light of that. Well, that's just a little bit of how I enter this discussion. Given the fact that this is Black History Month, shout out to Carter G. Woodson. Given the fact that Jesse Louis Jackson passed just shy of a couple of weeks ago, and one of the major planks that he continued to carry around the issue of push People United to Save Humanity and the Rainbow Coalition was the legacy work from the Poor People's Campaign, the extent to which poverty assaulted the dignity of human life. I want to maintain that the raw edge of poverty is homelessness. To the extent that that's the case, we are contextually aligned tonight during Black History Month, during the conversation around poverty and injustice, when we enter this discussion entitled Systemic Racism and African American People Experiencing Homelessness. The three of you are well acquainted with the subject. I'm just going to ask you to share a little bit of how you found yourself and locate yourself and your commitment to the question of homelessness. And then I want to drill down in terms of some of the racial components as they contribute themselves to the discussion. So Reba, why don't you begin? Alisa, pick up from there, and Seth, show us what you got.
Well, let me begin by saying thank you and good evening to everyone, and welcome to the homeless working group. It's truly an honor, and I always like to acknowledge my uncomfortability. I am a little nervous because it means just that much to me. But I come to this space as someone who lived on the streets of Los Angeles for 21 years. And I know what it feels like to navigate systems that were not built for you to, in line. And I know what it feels like to survive outside while navigating this invisible weight of racism and criminalization and neglect. And today I sit at system spaces, but I never forget where I came from. My dedication is to this work, and it comes from my lived experience in proximity. I have walked in encampments not as a visitor, but as someone who understands the terrain. And I've stood at visuals and read names of people whose stories could have been mine. For me, houselessness is not abstract. It's not theoretical, it is personal, it's structural, and it's urgent.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Alisa Orduna, show us what you got.
It's never easy following up after Reba.
Yeah.
Thank you, Reba. Good to see you, supervisor, and thank you all for joining tonight. There's two, I would say, experiences that I have of what kind of ground me in this work. One was a memory of my Uncle Ray, my mother's uncle, who was a World War II veteran, who used to, when he came back from war, just didn't want to be inside. And so I remember as a small child driving around Jefferson and Arlington and the West Adams area looking for Uncle Ray and remembering how the community cared for him. So we'd stop at a barbershop or a local place and they're like, yeah, he's in the back or up on the rooftop or, in like a garage area. And this man in a plaid shirt smelling a little bit like kerosene from the heater would come out with a little scruffy beard. And I'm like, who is this person? And years later, understanding it was Uncle Ray. And then juxtapose that when I, after graduate school, lived in Philadelphia. First real job was at a family shelter and program, and seeing the number of Black faces. So this is mid 90s, heighten of the crack epidemic, and more than the drug usage itself was how our system penalized our families instead of trying to help them. So high levels of removal of children from families and coming into the homeless response system, and then starting to see just in my short time generations coming in and recognizing this was a systemic issue. How do we address it? What are the root causes of it? And just kind of fast forward, I would say the third supervisor is you when you name this as the civil rights issue of the time. And that's always stuck with me because I often wonder how come the talk about houselessness is not a Black topic. It's always, even within our own communities, sometimes looked at like personal responsibility or personal choice and not as systemic issues as when we talk about housing or job discrimination or some of the other isms. So that is kind of my passion and trying to figure it out. And I would just say shifting from looking at the individual within the crisis to more the mirror of society, and why is it so hard for us to create cultures of belonging instead of constantly leaning into othering and segregation.
Thank you. Seth Pickens.
Yes, and thank you, Supervisor, and the entire working group. Very humbled and happy to be here. For me, I think it always has been a moral, spiritual issue. I can remember even being very, very young and, saying prayers at night. And one night, and grew up in Detroit, Michigan, one night my mother said, and bless those that are sleeping on the ground tonight. And just at a very young age, it really, really hit me, and it never left me. And so fast forward, I moved to Los Angeles 2009 to lead a congregation, pastor a church, and hadn't been there too long. And a young man in his 20s, Black man, we had a gym at the church and, playing basketball, and then it's over. He didn't have anywhere to go. And he told me that, and let him sleep in my office for a little while. And, even faced some backlash from some of the leaders at that church at the time, which I think is ironic, but there you go. So, did move on from that church and got involved, as Rhea mentioned, with the Economic Roundtable, and I was working with Long Beach City College students. But at the core, and now at USC, at the core of it, spiritually, morally, is the knowing that, well, the way I hold it, that we are all divine, that we are all worthy, that we do have dignity, that, there is love, there is untapped potential at the core. And, not to over theologize it, but Jesus said, whatever you do for the least of my people, you do for me. And so to always remember that everyone does deserve dignity, everyone has honor, everyone has, like I said, that untapped potential, everyone has more in store, capacity for healing, for real. And so, LA and the unhoused conversation is, if we can prove it here, we can really prove it anywhere. And so excited about a lot of the progress that's been made, and there's a lot to be done, and happy to be a part of the conversation.
Appreciate that. How about a little straight talk and leaning in? Anybody object? If you do, you didn't come to the right meeting. It's like being in church. Extend the right hand of fellowship, and those who are not prepared to do that, they came to the wrong church. So Reba, tell us, are you adequately leaning into and learning from the African American experience in terms of fellow Angelenos with lived experience? How do we translate that? How do we further draw upon that lived experience and expertise? The larger question is, to what extent is the disproportionality, and this will be something that each of you can reflect on, to what extent is the disproportionality of African Americans experiencing homelessness being centered such that the question of race is taken seriously? Reba, Seth?
Well, let me
Yeah,
begin by saying that that's a loaded question.
yeah.
So respectfully, not yet. And we've created space for storytelling, uh, but storytelling is not the same as power. And we, as people with lived experience, are invited to listening sessions, advisory groups, and panels, but the real decisions are still being made by in executive spaces and policy, budget hearings, philanthropy, um, academics, institutions, government leaderships, where those of us with lived experience are still underrepresented or absent many times. So if we're serious about equity and lived experience, it must move beyond council table. It must sit at tables where priorities are being set, resources are allocated, and contracts are awarded. Policies are being drafted, and outcomes are measured. And this isn't just about the homelessness system. It's about housing. It's about public health. It's about education, workforce development, criminal justice, uh, faith institutions, all systems that are leading spaces. So when I think about the question overall, it's shifting power in what it actually looks like. So following the money, finding Black-led, culturally rooted organizations that are at scale with multi-year support, not short-term pilot dollars. Too oftentimes, it's always about just something that is temporary. We have to stop. Uh, we have to stop hiding from and use real language. Name anti-Black racism directly. Build strategies that reduce the Black homelessness and not just overall numbers. If we're going to get real about what this discussion is about, use influence to remove those barriers, streamline procurement, and reduce compliance burdens that
Are you saying that isn't happening? And
I'm saying that it's not happening.
all right, you're
I'm
certain.
clearly saying that it is not happening.
So then, the extent to which, or is it happening less now, than it was before? Is there less attention being focused on race, racism, systemic racism? Um, Dr. Duna, Dr. Seth, what are you thinking about that? Dr. Pickens? And just
And
jump,
tell the truth. And tell
yeah,
the truth.
and shame the devil. Come on in here and do what you need to do.
I'll jump in real quick. I mean, I do think that there has been more conversation, even, and I mean, we all know about the Black people experiencing homelessness and the ad hoc committee and these things. So these
Yeah.
are things that we would not have seen a generation or two ago. I think just to really get to it, from my take, all of that is good and helpful. Then at the same time, so if we look at the arc of this and we talk about the systemic racism, this is baked in pre-1776. It's in the blueprints. So it's in the building. And even as you add it on, so we understand that. So then that being the case, to, to ask others for something, you're like, hey, you're racist against us. Stop it. Give us more of something. I mean, and it has worked somewhat, but it only take us so far. And then to understand that history of Black people in America is to understand that some of the brightest spots, the most wealth, the strongest families came out of necessity in segregation. So I'm not, pushing for segregation, but I am saying that a lot of times the solution is not in anyone else's hands except ours. So yes, major white Jewish philanthropies give us more. Yes, city, county, state, privilege us in some ways, but also, what can we do, or what have we done? So that's a conversation around capacity building. That's a conversation around starting younger with youth, because at the rate homelessness is going now, and hate to say that, but the 10-year-old now, 20 years from now, and, God forbid, hopefully we're doing something about this, but so there's something to be said for starting younger, because this disparity is not just a housing crisis. I mean, to understand all this, you could look at and basically see, white and Asian, and then Hispanic, and then at the bottom, Black. That is housing, homelessness, that is mortgages, that is arrest rates, that is graduation rates, that is GPA, that is who gets suspended, that is who gets, searched when they get pulled over. White and Asian, not so much. Hispanic, a little worse, and then Black. So that's systemic. That's the systemic thing. So to just, all right, since the supervisor is encouraging me to,
Tell the truth.
pull it a little bit here,
Choke it.
really quick. I gotta say this, in the Book of Revelation.
Yeah.
The beast that they are fighting, then this is basically good versus evil. The beast, the mark of the beast, right? It has 7 heads. So, and one of the heads has a fatal wound that had healed. So 7 heads. And so even if you cut one of the heads off, there's a la homelessness, or let's solve poverty, or let's solve homelessness. You're just cutting one of those heads off. The other 6 heads are still doing their thing. And as a matter of fact, the other 6 heads will give life back to that 7th head. So it's a widespread issue. And I think the solution has got to start with us, and not us asking others, but us asking ourselves.
A provocative point, Dr. Seth Pickens. I want to follow up with you on that after Dr. Orduna weighs in. But my follow-up, I'll tee up now. The most endowed entity, the entity that is asset predominant on a comparative basis in the context of the African American experience, is the church.
Mhm.
And so the extent to which you make the claim of operationalizing our autonomy and our agency, what say ye? Tee up for you, Dr. Pickens, of the role of the church. What has it done? What is it doing? What is it equipped to do in the future? Because it seems to me that a lot of this, if I follow your line of reasoning, has to rest with the entity that has most capacity. Dr. Orduna, jump in and take it wherever you want to go.
I was going to say, I forgot the original question. So I'm going to
Yeah.
go back. Last night, Dr. Ryan Smith from St. Joseph Center
Yeah.
held the Black Futures event, like his second annual. And one stat, and I forgot who said it, was that today it would take Black folks 218 years to catch up in wealth to the average white household today in 2026.
Mhm.
And that just really, when we talk about structural and Reba, you were on point when you talked about we get programs, we don't get system change, we don't get transformative change. And so what came to me as all of you were talking, I was trying to stay focused on your question, supervisor. For me, I think there was this push, when we did the Black people experiencing homelessness, the initial back in 2017 and 2018, and it was, documenting systemic racism and the impact on disparities and bringing that into question. But like so much, the conversation then got co-opted, and I start hearing people now, talking about it and talking about equity, but the behaviors aren't changing that are needed. Like those funding decisions aren't changing, the people in representative positions or leadership positions aren't changing. There's like, we're just recycling a cohort of folks. So there aren't new ideas that are happening. I see some movement in youth, but at the same time, I almost see now younger advocates being pivot against advocates that have been in this work and doing it for a long time. I don't see people bringing it together. It's almost like, well, we need to change faces. So let's just go to the transition age youth population. But again, that's just creating another divide. It's like moving paper from side to side. It's not actually bringing foundational change. And I haven't seen that risk taking since your leadership, to be honest with you. And so where do we then pivot as a community? I think some of us are tired, or not tired, but
Yeah.
fatigued in the sense that we keep trying it. Even, yeah, Trump is going to do what Trump does. We know that. I didn't even have to read 2025, and you could see where he was going to go. But as a community, somehow like the spaces that we used to maybe meet in have been diluted. And I think there's so much information coming at folks that's adding to the fatigue. And then you feel like you're having the same conversation over and over again. So I don't think I answered your question, but I guess I'm at a point of frustration because while I hear more people reference Black people experiencing homelessness, which is, I always tell people, first time I saw Black folks that were unhoused, but the term homeless associated with Black folks was in W.B. Du Bois' Souls of Black Folks. That was
Mhm.
written in what, 1907? And he was talking about post-Reconstruction when people were coming into the Union set up camps looking for food and shelter. And they're like, what are we supposed to do with these folks? Are we supposed to feed and shelter them? So this is, like you said, this is centuries old. So we know the issue and the solutions. I think we have them. But to Seth's point, how do we get our billionaires to invest in housing? How do we get them to, like what are this, how we have enough resources and there's people, how do we begin to take care of our own? We seem to do it when we don't have money, but on a large scale, when we start getting money and separating out, we just get diluted.
No
I want
need
to
to be
jump in. I'm sorry. I want to jump in
jumping.
on the
Jump in here. Take
on
over.
where you talked about the church. I don't want to take over, but don't give me permission, please.
It's insurrection.
I'm getting a little comfortable here.
Yeah, yeah.
But, I think that the question that you had raised was critically important because, for me, it's 21 years of being unhoused, but then there's that 27 years in which I have not been. And so if you calculate those numbers, I'm going to take you back to Second Baptist Church, to the Henderson House. I'm going
Yeah.
to take you to a place where we came in and there were rules, regulations, guidelines, and procedures, no matter what. Nobody was pushing Jesus. They were Christ-like in their actions. And you had to grow up to see that later on at some point. But the point I want to make here is that the faith-based community was all we had when I was unhoused. Those were the steps in which we laid on. Those were the doors in which we knocked on, but those doors answered. And when those doors answered, they answered to a call of not just bringing you in to give you warmth in a meal. There were those rules, regulations, those guidelines, those procedures. There was structure. And one of the things that I needed most in my life to regain was structure in my life. Now, on the flip side of that, if you take it up to right now, we're looking at a mass of people. These numbers weren't like this during that particular time, right? It just wasn't. And so when we're asking the faith base to do something after we have spent millions and billions of dollars and denied them, the churches have been denied, in my opinion, to be a part of the solution. So who could afford it today? That's the question.
All right. Real talk. Question pertains to the following. The data might suggest that there's improvement in terms of homelessness as it is defined, houselessness as it is defined, but somehow that appears to be contradicted by what we observe anecdotally. In other words, what we feel about progress over against what the data seems to suggest is very different. And I wonder to what extent did that drill down in terms of how we view this through an African American lens, not to be parochial, not to be narrow, not to be exclusive, but just to be focused in terms of the African American lens. Are we making progress? Have we lost ground? What players were with us before versus who's with us now and who has become conspicuously absent? Who are our allies in the effort to confront homelessness with a level of imagination, to leverage our academic resources, uh, Seth, to leverage our lived experiences, Reba, to leverage our advocacy, Alisa. Where are we? What are we up to? Are we moving forward? I mean, we can invoke the language around the study uh, on African Americans in Los Angeles County, the first that had been done in LA County, and come to find out it was the first that had been done in the nation, as you recall. Imagine that, 2018. And that's another way of saying how seriously Black life had been taken. And so, more or less, backward, forward, what say ye? Come at it.
Yeah. Well, no, I mean, I really appreciate the conversation. So when we say, the numbers are going down, homelessness, the issue is getting better, it's improving. That is, I mean, a couple of things with that you got to look at. One is that, I mean, like the stock market, it goes like this day to day.
Yeah.
For over 100 years, it's been going like this. But so if I say, well, hey, 2025 was better than 2024, then, but then, and then in 2027, we say, oh yeah, sorry, it's way worse again. We got to see. So like I said, if your stock goes up for one day, that's not something to, totally jump for joy and retire over yet. And so that's part of these longer term trends we got to look at. The other thing is that every count, I hear that sound. Is that better? Okay. Oh, no. I don't know what's happening there. I apologize. Okay, I think we got it. Forgive the echo, but I'll just briefly say that the other thing is that all of these counts have a particular method behind them. First of all, is it possible to count every unhoused person in LA County in a matter of days or weeks or months? No, it's not. So we have a method to it that is an interpretation, is a snapshot. So we're looking at a different snapshot year over year anyway. And then there's some argument, the Rand Corporation, others putting out that, the method was a gross undercount. So, the idea that it's going down is politically expedient because then politicians can say, yeah, what we're doing is working and that's good for them. But as you said, don't trust your lying eyes or what we see and what we feel around the city. So I'll leave that there just so others can get to speak on it too. But those are things we got to look at when we hear the numbers that it's going down. And I'll just touch on the faith base real quick too, because we didn't want to leave that alone.
Right.
So yes, you're right. Churches, that the real estate is there, the weekly donations and deposits. Pre-COVID, I heard a number of 900 Black churches in LA, and might be a little lower than that post-COVID, but it's still, I should have a better number on that. But somewhere between 500 and 1,000 for sure, over north of 500. And, weekly donation deposits, real estate holdings, for sure, it's there. But then we got to look again on a broader societal level. Church for the last 50 years, everyone knows this, giving and attendance has gone like this over the last 50 years. So what we expected from the height of Henderson House, and I could name all the names, it's a different context today. So that's something to look at. I think, and I don't know how many other clergy might be on the call here, but, we got to look at, you got to look at the leaders, at the leadership, not a lack of intention. Some of it is burnout, frankly. I've lived that. Some of it is a lack of capacity building. Because I'll say this real quick, supervisor, 30, 40 years ago, a pastor could walk in the mayor's office, walk in the governor's office, walk out with some serious resources or write a 2-page letter and walk out with some real resources to make some things happen. Now the level of capacity that's required to interact with philanthropy, to interact with state, city, county, most pastors, we're versed in the Bible and theology, but that's a whole nother lane where the capacity hasn't been built. Shout out to the Cecil Murray Center and others who have done a lot in that area. But that's a huge factor. A lot of people are tired of hearing all this, Jesus talk, but not seeing the results, frankly. So, people are turned off by it, even though at the end of the day, I think folks, for the most part, especially our people, do believe in a higher power and do believe in the collective and want to see love conquer. So I'll pin that on a need of capacity building to meet the need of the issue and the complexity of it on the part of church leaders. So I'll stop there. I could go on, but I'll put a pin in it right there for now.
All right, we got 10 minutes to roll. I want to put a fine point on the question of...
Oh, well, can I say this, supervisor?
Sure. Jump on in here. The water's fine.
When you talked about allyship, like who are our allies or who should be our allies or whatever, I was like, who should be? And I think what's coming to, we need an economic development strategy. So we have been pigeonholed into just creating housing strategies, just homelessness. When it comes to Black folks, we need an economic strategy. I look at the results from the various universal basic income pilots. When you give people a set sum of money and let them figure out what to do with it, you start to see success in their lives. I'm part of a program at Santa Monica College where we're creating this certificate in homeless service work. And it's not, yes, we're part of a nonprofit industrial complex and all of that, but more importantly, it's giving our frontline workers some certification that will hopefully leverage and translate into higher income and career pathways that they can go on and get bachelor's degree. Or now we're finding in college technical education, maybe it's a certification in AI, social engineering, or some other, like it doesn't have to be a 4-year degree. And so how do we create these foundational skills to support an economic empowerment strategy, particular to our folks? And then that moves us also away from who's defined as being unhoused, because for us, our family members aren't necessarily going to be in places not meant for human habitation. They might be couch surfing. They might be staying with grandma tonight and a friend over there because they have a child and we're not going to let that baby out onto the street. But when we, technically when we do that, they're not eligible for quote unquote homeless services. So I think our allies are, if we look at partners in developing an economic strategy for Black folks, because I think the experience of housing instability goes way deeper. It's like the iceberg than what we even imagine, and especially in these times, and it's going to get worse. And so how do we, Seth, you talked about, back in segregated times when the doctors and, the garbage man and the farmer all lived in the same community, there was this sense of kinship and this sense of circular economics. How do we get back there and decolonize our mindset from being in competition with one another?
A question. Thank you for that and those insights of both Alisa, Seth, and Reba. I want to know the following. What are the pros and cons of putting a fine point on the question of Black homelessness or Black people experiencing homelessness in the context of the city and the county of Los Angeles? How do we advance the quote unquote plight of those who are most dramatically, that is to say, disproportionately affected? How do we get that work done? How do we open up the lanes for allies to recognize not to do that has racial implications unto itself? And how do we create the intersectional conversation so that the business of those who are, to borrow an earlier invocation, the least of these are treated with the dignity, the imagination, the agency, the autonomy, the worth that they are due, not at the expense of anyone else, but what is to be gained and how do we pursue putting a fine point on the question of the crisis enveloping Black communities, where in fact housing insecurity, houselessness, homelessness is a very forceful issue. Stop messing around, Reba, and answer my question.
Go for it, Reba.
Yeah.
You're muted, Reba.
I think Reba's trying to say she can't unmute.
Oh, you can unmute? What's going on?
When we press ask to unmute, Miss Reba, does anything pop up for you?
The devil is a lie. Say your piece. All right. Seth, Alisa, jump in, and Reba will get there. Short off. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. Worst case, maybe jump off and jump back on. Worst case, but yeah, no, that's a great question. And so a lot of this conversation, Black people experiencing homelessness ad hoc committee. I mean, I saw, and maybe I'm off on the timing a bit, but it timed with George Floyd. There was a major rise in this conversation. I know it's older than that.
Yeah.
But there seemed to be a real popular rise and mainstream acceptance where the rest of the nation saw something that we've, been living with for, a century plus. And so that seems to have, the good that was able to be, garnered from that tragedy, it seems that it has been garnered. So and I'm not making light of any of that. So yeah, what good is it, or what's the benefit of putting a fine point on Black homelessness? I think that is an important internal conversation, internal to Black people, and I'm not, don't want to over tribalize it, but a lot of
No,
times when, we've all been in these circles where we talk about systemic racism, we talk about Black people, we talk about, Black, and others who aren't Black are sympathetic and are sometimes even entertained. And I don't mean any harm by that, but it's kind of entertaining, or it's kind of cool, or it's kind of, like righteous solidarity to be down with the cause without necessarily, but yet we still aren't seeing the needle move. So, where, and so that, I mean, it's obviously a complicated issue, but I would push it to, again, there is a conversation around greater collaboration, greater accountability, greater trust, even within the Black community. So, this is a tough one here, man. But I think that at the end of the day, am I really giving my all? Am I really giving my all? Am I really learning, growing, or am I in it for something else?
mm-hmm.
And that's critiquing clergy, that's critiquing politicians, that's critiquing researchers. So yeah, just to put you maybe like 10 or 15 seconds here to wrap it up for me too. I think it's important because it's true to put a fine point on it. The disparity is there, so we got to name it. But again, this is not just a homelessness thing. It's only education, health, banking, justice, and homelessness, right? And media, right? That's all. So that's a very large conversation. But so maybe that point needs to be put on it across all of those boards in a global leadership fashion.
No question about it. I will say to you quickly that had I, as the lead advocate for the passage of Measure H, put race, particularly African American homelessness, as a fine point in the work, I have a strong sense that Measure H would not have been adopted. I have a very strong sense that such is the case. So it was a strategic determination. If we want to get those resources, we needed to find a way to talk about the crisis without, quote unquote, racializing it. But in so doing, what is sacrificed? And is that still operative in the way we deal with implementation scenarios? Alisa Orduna.
Mm-hmm. I was,
Are you good now?
yeah, Reba
Reba?
can come off. Uh-huh.
All right.
All right, so I'll be quick. I would just say if it's in the public, I don't think city or county can lead this conversation. I think we need to come together and lead this conversation as leaders, as practitioners, as people with lived experience, and develop a policy agenda that we can then present to the leaders, because I think things get lost in translation. And I do think the competing interests. One, in the public space, though, I do believe in target universalism, which is a process where you set out certain goals. So whatever percent of folks get into housing or keep housing or whatever, and then you can measure it by race. What are the different needs within in order to achieve that goal? And so to me, that's that common ground of how do you have cross solidarity and not lose sight of what we need to do for our own folks. And it's not quite thought out, but I would like to see it. I know it'll be in the minority on the call, but I want to see I want to see us develop strategy sessions with our American Indian community, because there's some deep conversations going on with land back and other ways that they are fighting back in a policy perspective. So just on terms of strategy, not solidarity again where we give up what we're fighting for, but just broadening our experiences and ideas around strategy so that we're going in together. I think it would be important going into the future.
All right, thank you. Reba, weigh in, and then I'm going to ask everybody to
So
for
I'll say
closing
this.
remarks.
I appreciate the responses, but I just want to remind us that in I think it was 2016 or 2015 when I rung your phone, then Alisa Orduna with the city talking about and screaming and hollering and crying with fear about Black people.
Mm-hmm.
And from that point, you did some things and gathered some folk. The point I want to make here is that we created 67 recommendations. We sat around tables. And so I don't think that there's a need to reinvent anything. I think that this is about accountability in a manner in which we are not only holding or striving to hold others accountable, but that we're holding ourselves accountable. When we talk about commitment, let me really remind you that I'm still committed to this moment. But it seems to me that everybody else has disappeared. And so when I'm talking about rock steady, baby. And I mean really rock and steady. Yeah, you can move and groove with it, but the bottom line is this: if it's keep on pushing. We should never stop. And I'm sick and tired of having a conversation about something that we are not picking up and continuing to move forward. Where is my Martin Luther King, Dr. Martin Luther King today? No, I'm serious. So we can talk about all of, what the solution may be, but we haven't. And we need to go back to basics and pick it up and move forward. But the other thing is, pay attention to groups that don't sit down, that stand up and continue to fight for what they believe in and what they need. And that's the position in which we have to take. And I am still ready for that. But I'm tired of having a conversation that actually goes nowhere. We can't keep talking about the problem. We got to get into the solution. I'm
All
going
right.
on mute.
We take that as your parting remarks, Dr. Reba Stevens and Dr. Alisa Orduna. We'll take yours at this moment.
I agree, Rita. I mean, we can't help but to continue to fight, and to the commitment will never go away. And just whatever we do, and Seth, you asked the question, can we do more? We just have to find those space. For me, it's teaching through a social justice lens. It's making sure that people see homelessness or houselessness as a social justice civil rights issue. It's working with youth and holding space for them in these times. So counter some of the suicide stats that we're starting to see. So there's just so much that we have to stand in the gap, and whatever that means for folks. And it isn't the time to sit down, and however we're doing that. So 100% agree with you, Reba.
All right, the Reverend Dr. Seth Pickens.
Yes, and then I apologize for,
remarks.
yes, for having to jump right after this. But I agree. I think at the end of the day, and the way I have it framed, it is truly a spiritual problem. So if money, how many billions thrown at it can't solve it, if how many thousands of social workers and armies of really well-intentioned people, this is something beyond the physical realm. And so then the solutions are also spiritual at the end of the day. So James Cone, who was the father of Black theology, and I was privileged in seminary to sit under him a few classes. And we would read Malcolm and Martin, and we get so inspired. And then we would say, well, how come Malcolm didn't do this? Or how come Martin didn't do that? Or how come Obama didn't do that? And then he would always say, how come you aren't doing that? whatever you're seeing in Malcolm and Martin or what they didn't do or what leaders aren't doing, if you're to the extent that you're inspired by it, you got to walk it. So, and I heard Reba say, like, well, where's our Martin Luther King? You know, Reba, maybe, I think it's you, Reba. You know, and I say that to everyone sincerely, that because again, back to where I started, was that we do all have much, much more potential, much, much more brain power, capacity, love, opportunity, possibility than we can ask or think, and to tap into that in a spiritual way. And so it starts with love, it starts with leadership, and that's you, honorable Dr. Mark Ridley-Thomas. And so we're truly grateful for you, man.
Well, thank you very much. Let's give our panel, Reba Stevens, Seth Pickens, Alisa Orduna, a big round of applause. That's an hour, and it went by very, very quickly. They are not off the hook because we will be re-engaging this conversation. It is important that we have these kind of interventions of candor. There's a lot to think about based on what was offered tonight, the questions that were pondered, the questions that need to be refined. And ultimately, the question is, where am I today and what am I doing with what I have to speak to this issue? It is a crisis that won't go away without our being on our knees where we need to be and on our feet where we need to be to do the work that's before us. Madam Chair, I return the gavel to your capable hands.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, Supervisor. Thank you to Dr. Pickens, who I know had another meeting, and so I'm sorry we kept him a little over. Thank you, Dr. Orduna. Thank you, Dr. Reba. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And, Supervisor, I also want to thank you as our moderator. You got to thank our panelists, but thank you because it is because of all of you that we are able to continue to do what we do. It's because of all of you that I am able to on mute scream behind my muted button saying yes, 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 yes. And I am very grateful because it is inspiring, it is refreshing, and it gives me hope. So I again just want to say thank you so much. We will not stop addressing all of the topics that impact and the inequities that lead to any single one of our fellow Angelinos and humans being unhoused. And we will continue to press on, especially with systemic racism and its impact on homelessness, houselessness, especially as it pertains to Black and African American people. So I just want to say thank you so much for joining us. Our next meeting will be on Thursday, March 12th via Zoom. In addition, we also have our Juneteenth event coming up on Saturday, June 20th, 2026. So we ask you to please save the date for that, and additional information will be forthcoming. I cannot believe how fast today's panel went. So I would like to echo Supervisor MRT's sentiments that to our esteemed panel and moderator, we will be inviting you back we will be, I'm asking to engage you with the follow-up panel. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And with that, I know we have some questions up in, from two of our working group members. I know that one of our panelists has had to leave already, so I don't know that we'll be able to do a Q&A session this evening. But if you would like to put your questions in the chat or comments in the chat before we wrap up for the evening, we'll be sure to, at least share it with all of the panelists and then share any additional information from those questions in our meeting on March 12th.
The chat is lit, 56 entries.
Sorry?
So I said the chat is lit. There are 56 comments in the chat. We'll make it a point of reviewing. Be here 2 weeks from the night. We're here for it. a lot of work to be done.
Yes.
We just can't let it go, and we can't turn back. And it's a matter of faith. It is not easy,
Mm-hmm.
not a lot of gratification, but there is a calling and a requirement that we engage this issue. And toward that end, I'm pleased that everyone is here tonight. Bring your A game to those who need and deserve our very best attention. With that, Madam Chair, I think we are concluded.
I think that is the benediction. Thank you all. Thank you, everybody. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.